Since the invention of the internet, we have been using different applications on web pages to get the data for various resources. However, have you ever thought, where does this data come from? Well, it's the servers from where we get the data. So hello all, this is Sahiti on behalf of Edureka, and I welcome you to this session on what is REST API. So in this session, we'll mainly focus on how a client communicates with the servers to extract the required information. So without wasting any further time, let's take a look at the topics for today's session. So we'll start today's session by understanding the need of REST API, and then we'll look into what is REST API. After that, I'll talk about the features of REST API and then deep dive into the principles of REST API. Finally, I'll tell you the methods of REST API and then end the session by telling you how you can implement REST API or how you can create a REST API. So I hope the agenda is clear to you guys. Alright, so before I move on with the session, I would like to request all of you who are interested to learn the top trending technologies to subscribe to our Edureka channel to get daily notified on various concepts on the top trending technologies. So let's get started with the first topic for today's session, that is, why do we need REST API? Now consider a scenario where you're using the Book My Show app. I'm sure that all of you must be using Book My Show app on a regular basis, right? Now obviously when you use this app, you must have observed that the application needs a lot of input data, as the data present in the application is never static. So what I mean by that is, when you consider the Book My Show app, all the time the movies are getting updated on daily basis. Even the show times and the places where the movies are shown, or maybe not just with respect to the movies but also with respect to the events, the data keeps getting updated on a regular basis. So where do you think we get this data from? Well, this data is received from a server, or most commonly known as a web server. So the client requests the server for a required information via an API, and then the server sends back a response to the client. Over here, the response sent to the client is in the form of an HTML web page. Now, do you think this is an apt response that you would expect when you send a request to the server? Obviously no, right? Just imagine yourself, if you're searching for a data for a specific movie at a specific place and a specific time, do you expect an HTML page back as a response? Well, I'm assuming the fact that you would also say a no, right? So since you would also prefer the data to be returned in form of a structured format rather than a complete web page, the data returned by the server in response to the request of the client is either in the form of a JSON format or in the form of an XML format. Now both JSON and XML formats are sent because they have a proper structure in which the data is represented. Now if I talk about the JSON formats and the XML formats, so as you can see on my screen, so for example, let's say we want to find out the data of the movies which are coming soon at a specific city. So what you can simply do is, if you just send a request of this particular information to the client, the server returns the data in either the JSON format or the XML format. So in the JSON format, it shows as you can see on my screen. So basically there's a city, and then there's movies, categories, and in the category you have coming soon. When you come to the XML format, in the XML format section, you basically have cities, movies, and then again we have a category section which shows coming soon. So over here, if you observe, the JSON format has basically format of an object where the object values are returned to the user. And coming to the XML format follows a hierarchical data structure in which the data can be returned. Now this sounds quite simple, right? But the only issue which is present in this framework is that you have to use a lot of methods to get the required information from the server. Even if the data is returned in a simple format, that is the JSON or the XML format, the only problem till now is that you have to do a lot of work to get your data back. Like you have to put in a lot of do post, do get methods, and then you have to request for the data to be returned and so on. For a single information, this sounds fine, but imagine the scenario where you continuously are requesting for data and then you have to look into so much of methods. Now this obviously becomes cumbersome. Now to avoid such kind of scenarios, what came into picture is the REST API. So the REST API creates an object and thereafter sends the values of the object in response to the client request. So now that you know the need of REST API, next let's look into what exactly REST API is. So what is REST API? Now, as I just mentioned, REST suggests the fact that you can just create an object of the data requested by the client and then send the values of the object in response to the user. Now, let's say, if you want to find out a scenario of a specific movie, let's say, if Infinity War is playing at Hyderabad at a specific place, let's say, at IMAX, and then timing at 10:30 in the night. Let's say we want to find out this particular data. So to find out this particular data, what will happen is a client will send a request to the server that he wants to find out the data that the movie Infinity War is playing in the city Hyderabad at IMAX at 10:30 or not. So when the request is sent to the server, what REST API does is that it creates an object of this particular request, and then it finds out whether it plays or not. So it searches for the data in the server for the client's request. If it finds out that the data is present, it just sends back a response to the client with the values of that particular object. So now if you observe over here, what's happening? You're creating an object, and then you have some values of an object. And what's happening is that the values of the object are sent to the client. So that's basically the state of an object is sent to the client. So each and every time you don't have to generate a new object. So what happens is you're just passing the state of an object to the client. So since you're just passing the state of an object, that's where the term representational state transfer comes in. Now, if I have to define REST for you, then representational state transfer, or REST, is an architectural style as well as an approach for communication purposes that is often used in various web services development. This architectural style of REST helps in leveraging the lesser use of bandwidth to make an application more suitable for internet, and is often regarded as the language of internet and is completely based on resources. Apart from this, it's also a stateless client-server model that you can understand about. So REST is really simple, guys. It's just an architectural style as well as an approach for communications purposes that is often used by various web services development. So now that you know what REST is, let's look into the features of the REST API. So the features of REST API are, as you can see on my screen, it's more simpler than SOAP. It has a proper documentation, and it gives you proper logging of error messages. So before the REST came into picture, what we had was SOAP. So after REST API took over the world, then you can just say that you can use REST API in a much easier way than SOAP. Coming to documentation, so it comes with a good documentation so that you understand each and every step of how you can create a REST API using various technologies, various frameworks, and how you can embed them for your applications. And finally, coming to error messages, when I say error messages, it has proper logging information of the errors. So for example, let's say you're creating a REST API using a specific framework, and then you're stuck somewhere. What happens is you get a proper message about the error that's coming up, so that the user can understand what's the error about and can debug it. These were the features of REST API. Now let's move forward and understand the principles of REST API. Well, there are 6 ground principles laid by Dr. Fielding, who was the one to define the REST API design in 2000. So the 6 ground principles are stateless, client-server, uniform interface, cacheable, layered systems, and code on demand. So talking about stateless, what I mean by stateless is that when the requests are sent from a client to the server, it contains all the information that is required to make the server understand it. So it can be a part of a URL, or query string parameters, body, or even headers. Now the URL is basically used for uniquely identifying the resource, and the body holds the state of the requesting resource. Once the processing is done by the server, an appropriate response is sent back to the client through header, status, or response body. Coming to client server, when I say client server, what I mean by that is that it has a uniform interface that separates the clients from the servers. So separating the concerns basically helps in improving the user's interface portability across multiple platforms, as well as enhance the scalability of the server components. Coming to uniform interface, to obtain the uniformity through the application, REST has defined 4 interface constraints, which are resource identification, resource manipulation using representations, self-descriptive messages, and hypermedia as the engine of the application state. Coming to cacheable, in order to provide a better performance, the applications are often made as cacheable. It is done by labeling the response from the server as cacheable or non-cacheable, either implicitly or explicitly. If the response is defined as cacheable, then the client cache can reuse the response data for equivalent responses in the future. It also helps in preventing the reuse of stale data. Next, moving forward with layered systems, the layer system architecture allows an application to be more stable by limiting the component behavior. This architecture enables load balancing and provides shared caches for promoting scalability. The layered architecture also helps in enhancing the application security, as components in each layer cannot interact beyond the next immediate layer they are in. And finally, coming to code on demand, the code on demand is an optional constant and is used the least. It permits a client's code or applets to be downloaded and extended via the interface to be used within the application. In essence, it simplifies the clients by creating a smart application which doesn't rely on its own code structure. So now that you know the principles behind the REST API, next let's take a look at the methods of the REST API. Now, all of you might be working with the technologies of web, right? So what do? You work on CRUD applications. So when I say CRUD, I mean that, we create a resource, we read a resource, we update a resource, and we delete a resource. Now, for example, if you consider the URL that you can see on my screen, what it says is that, HTTPS and then bookmyshow.com/Noida/movies. Now, if you observe over here, for quite a long time, I've been saying the word resource. Do you know what that means? Well, resource is basically what you want to do. So for example, let's say, we want to search for the city Noida and then movies. So if you consider the URL that you can see on my screen, if you hadn't put it like this, then you would have searched it like, search is equal to Noida, and then you put one more query parameter of movies. So basically you would have to put two query parameters, that is Noida and movies. And before that you had to put the URL. But obviously that doesn't sound like a resource, right? Because you always cannot just put question mark and then you cannot keep putting the query parameters. Instead of that, you can just use these URLs like, with slash, you mention the first parameter, and with the second slash, you mention the second parameter, and so on. So that's basically how your data structure might also be defined in the server. So that's what basically I mean by a resource. So when I say resource is something that a client wants to know, or maybe the data that client is looking for. So now to do these actions, that is basically to create a resource, read a resource, update and delete the resource, you can actually use the HTTP methods, which are nothing but the methods of REST API. So for creating a request, you can use the post method. For reading a request, you can use a get method. For updating a resource, you can use the put method. And for deleting a resource, you can use the delete method. So all these methods together are basically the HTTP methods. That is the post, get, put, and delete are the HTTP methods. So now that you know what is REST API and what all you need to mind in order to deliver an efficient application, let's next look into how you can create a REST API. So for this practical demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple CRUD REST application using Node.js. So to build the application, basically I'll be using Node.js, Express.js, Joey, and NodeMon. Apart from that, let me tell you that, I'll be using the WebStorm ID to write and execute the codes. So you can use any ID according to your convenience. So let's start by, creating a REST API using Node.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically create a project directory in which, I'm going to have all the project related files. So let's say, I just right click over here and then let me just create a project directory. Let's say demo for REST API. Now basically this project directory is initially blank, as you can see on my screen. But after a while, once I install all the required libraries and packages, you'll see that, package.json file and package.log.json file automatically created. I'll open my command prompt, and then what I'll do is I'll navigate to my demo folder. So if you observe over here, my demo folder was an E directory and the folder name is demo for REST API. So what I'll do is I'll just type in E and colon over here, and then I'll mention CD and type in demo for REST API, right? So automatically I'll navigate to my project folder through the command prompt. Now what you have to do is you have to first initially install Node.js. So to install Node.js, it's really simple. You have to go to their official website and then you have to choose the LTS version based on whatever is your bit, like Windows 32-bit or 64 or maybe other kernels. According to that, you download your version, double click it, and automatically Node will be installed. So since I've already installed Node in my system, I'll just open the version and show you. So as I type in node -- version, you can clearly see that I have the version 10.16.0. So that means our node is installed. Now what we have to do is you have to basically call the npm package to initialize the npm modules into your system. So to do that, what you will do is you will type in npm init. So this will basically initialize all the npm modules into your system. once you do this, what you'll see is basically you'll be asked to enter the details for your project. For example, let's say package name to be demo, right? Oh, it says you cannot put in capital letters, right? So I'll just type in demo over here, and then version, let it be 1.0.0 only. So I'll just click on enter. Description, let's say we mention it's hands-on for creation of REST API. After that, entry point. This is the main thing that you basically have to enter. So remember the fact that you have to mention the entry point file. So over here, I'm going to mention it to be script.js. So this is basically from where our process workflow is going to start. And then after that, we just click on enter. After that, you'll see you have test command. I'll just click on enter, get repository, enter, keywords, enter, author. Let's say I put in my name and the license to be the same. So after that, it will ask you for a confirmation. So basically the project name to be demo, version 1.0.0, description to be hands-on for creation of REST API, main to be script.js, and then so on. So if it's okay, I'll just click on Y and enter. So whatever you defined till now is basically the metadata for your project. So if I shift back now, you'll automatically see that, the package file has been created. So now if I go back to my command prompt, what you have to do is you have to next install express.js. To install express.js, what you have to do is you have to mention npm I and then mention the library name, that is express. So you'll automatically see that it is getting downloaded. So let's just wait for it to be installed. So the Express is basically a web framework which can be used along with Node.js. So this is a web framework which allows you to create RESTful APIs with the help of helper methods, middle layers to configure your application. After that, similarly, you'll have to install Joey. To install Joey, I'll type in npm I JOI, right? So once I mention that, you'll see that Joey library is also getting installed. Joey is basically used to validate your information, whether it's in the right format or not. So all the time, you don't have to validate your server. You can just directly install this library, and this library will validate the information for you. After that, you also have to install NodeMon. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll just type in npm I-g. I'll mention NodeMon and click on enter. So as you can see, NodeMon is also getting installed. So let's just wait for that to happen again. So as you can see, NodeMon has also got installed. Now NodeMon is basically used to keep a watch on all the files with any type of extensions present in the folder, that is basically the project folder. Also with NodeMon on the watch, you don't have to restart the Node.js server each time any changes are made. So basically what happens generally is that if you don't use NodeMon, then you have to restart the server anytime you make a change. So with the help of NodeMon, you don't have to do that. Automatically, NodeMon will implicitly detect the changes and then restart the server for you. Now, once you're done installing all these frameworks, let me just open the package.json file and show you. So if I just open the package.json file with WebStorm. All right, so let me just zoom in a little bit. So as you can see, when I open my package.json file, what you clearly see that is whatever metadata that you had entered when you were initializing your NPM module, right? So that's basically demo and the description and then what's the main file and so on. So this was about the package.json file, guys. Now what you have to do is basically you'll have to define the entry point for your application, right? That's basically a workflow. Now to do that, you have to basically define the script.js file that you had mentioned in your package.json file. So to do that, what you'll do is you'll go to your demo folder over here, right click over here, and then let's say we create a new JavaScript file. We'll name it script.js, and then we'll click on OK. Now in the script.js file, let me just put in the code that I've already coded, and then I'll explain you step by step what's happening. Right, so now let me just zoom in a little bit. All right, so as you can see, this is basically my script.js file. So don't worry, I'm going to explain you each and every step, and then you'll understand clearly how we are sending information to the client and how the server is sending us back the response. Initially, as I told you before, that we had installed Express. So what we're going to do is first we're going to import Express. So to do that, what you'll do is you'll mention const and Express and then equal to require Express. You're basically assigning it to a variable Express over here, and then you're just importing that particular library over here. Similarly goes for Joey. So both these libraries are imported to your file. Now what you have to do is you have to create an express application, right? So to do that, what you'll do is you'll basically use this particular variable that you had created over here, that is basically express, and then assign it to the app variable. So further, what we're going to do is we're going to use this app variable to understand the application and do various actions on this application, right? So we're going to use this. So now when I say we're going to use this particular variable, so basically you have to make sure that that particular variable is using it, right? So for that, you'll just put app.use, and then you'll mention express.json because we want to use a JSON file. What I mean by JSON file. Now, for any application to work, you have to put in a database, right? You can either use MySQL, MongoDB, or any other kind of databases. So over here, I'm not going to connect it to any such databases. I'm going to just use a JSON file which has a list of the data that we are going to enter, and that will be stored on a server. So the data is basically stored in the JSON format. So that is the reason we'll be using express.json. Now, talking about server. So when a client sends a request to the server, initially the server has to be running. So for that, it needs a specific port. So what I did was I assigned a port environment variable automatically to 8080, right? So basically what's happening is that you don't have to assign it again and again when you use an environment variable. Automatically, what I did was that, the server will be running on the port 8080, and then to just give an output that, yes, the server is running or not, I've just printed a log message saying the listening or the port, and then port number will be mentioned. That will be basically 8080 over here. So to make sure that, the server is running, and then, the server is connected to our system, that is basically our application from where we want the data to come. So we will just use this command saying app.listen, and we'll basically make the server listen to the port that is 8080 over here, and then we'll display the message. So that's with the server. Now, if you observe, I've told you one thing over here, that is the client will send the request to the server, right? And the server already has a set of data. So to basically define that data, I've created an object of customers. So over here, that is basically the object of customers, which have a specific name, that is basically title and an ID. So this particular data will be initially stored into our server, and then we can play around with the data based on whatever request that we send. Server will return the data. That is with giving data to the server. After that, let's start by, understanding basically the HTTP methods that I just discussed with you. That is get, put, post, and delete. So what I'm going to do in this hands-on is that I'm going to basically get all the data from the server. Then I'm going to basically find an information of a specific customer. Also, I can delete information about a customer. And finally, I can also update information about a customer. So let's understand the same. So initially, let's start with the get method. So if you remember from our presentation that the get method was basically to read the resource. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mention a URL, and then what I'm going to do is if I just type in a URL, then automatically a message should be displayed, right? So over here, I've mentioned the URL to be slash. So whenever it is localhost :8080/, automatically this will basically send a message that, welcome to Edureka's REST API. Now over here, if you're seeing what is the parameter, so basically request and response are the parameters that are used in the get method. Apart from that, when I say app.get, what I mean is that, basically we want our handler to handle all the requests on a specific URL. Now this URL that I've mentioned is according to my convenience. It is completely user's perspective what URL they want to mention. So you can mention slash, even then the code would work, and even then you would display the output. So over here, request is basically what is sent from the client side, and response is basically what is sent from the server side. So request over here will be the URL. So whenever I type in localhost :8080/, automatically a request from the client side will be sent to the server. And whenever the server identifies this particular URL, this particular message would be displayed. Coming to the next method, that is app.get, and then we are mentioning in the URL API customers. So now what I'm going to do is I want basically the list of customers. So that is basically whatever list I have mentioned in this particular object. So for that, what I'll do is I'll again similarly mention the URL, that is basically localhost :8080/API/customers. So whenever a client types in this particular URL, what I want in response is basically the list of customers that we had mentioned and we had stored on our server side, right? So that is basically all the 5 details. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll mention the command rest send and mention customers over here. So that is basically returning our customer object. Now let's say, we want to get the information of a specific customer. Let's say, we want to get the information of ID of Josh, right? So basically his ID is 2, right? So what I've done is in the URL, I've mentioned that, it will be /API/customers/ID. So whenever you send a request from the client side, what you have to mention in the URL is basically localhost :8080/API/customers/2. So whenever you send this request, a response will be sent from the server side showing you the details about the second ID, that is basically titled George and ID to be 2. So don't worry, I'm going to show you all the outputs when I run these codes. So before that, let's just understand these codes step by step. So now if you're wondering how is this happening, right? How is the REST API understanding the fact that, we have to search for the ID2 in the server side? So basically that's happening through this particular line over here. So basically we assign the customer object to customer.find, and then what we're doing is whatever query parameter that we're passing in the URL is basically checked with the customer ID. So for example, let's say customer ID2 is present. Only if it is successful, it will return the data. Else, let's say, there's no specific customer ID. For example, let's say we have only 5 IDs over here, right? Now, let's say, if someone just types in /6. So basically he's searching for the 6th ID, and that, there's no 6th ID present. Then what happens is that a 404 error will be displayed saying that, oops, can't find what you're looking for, right? So basically this is also user's perspective of how you want to display the data. So over here, I used 404 error. So that is basically the status I'm checking if the customer is not found. And then you display this particular message. So that's what is happening when the customer ID is not present. Now, I hope that, you've understood the get method. Now, let me just run this code and show you the outputs. So to show you the output and test the application, what I've done is I've used Postman. So Postman is basically a Chrome plugin which is used to send the request to the servers. So I've already installed that. Otherwise, it's really simple to install, guys. So what you can basically do is you can just click on the plus button over here, and then you can mention the URL. So as I was telling you, you have to mention the localhost :8080, and let's say we mention /. And then over here, you basically have to choose the method. So over here, I'm choosing the get method. Now, before I hit on send, what you have to do is you have to start your server, right? So for that, what I'll do is I'll go back to my command prompt. And then I'll mention node script.js. So once I mention that, you'll clearly see an output that, listening on port 8080. That means our server is up and running. Now, if I go back over here, and then if I just click on send, you'll see that, we get a display message saying, welcome to Edureka's REST API. So that's what you basically saw over here, right? So whenever we mention a /, you'll see the output as welcome to Edureka's REST API. Now, let's say, we mentioned /API/customers. Then according to our code, we have to get the list of customers. So I'll switch back, and then I'll mention API/customers and let the method to be get again and click on send. So once I click on send, you can clearly see an output that, we've got all the 5 details that we had mentioned in our script.js file, right? So that's basically the list of customers. Apart from that, we also saw one more thing that, if you want to get information about a specific customer. So let's say, we want to get information about the 3rd customer. So that's basically ID3. So I'll just put on / over here and mention 3 and click on send over here. So when I click on send, you'll clearly see an output that title Tyler and ID3. So that's how basically the get method works. And that's how basically your API is helping you to connect the client request to the server, and so that the server can send back the response to the client. Now let's move forward with the next method, that is the post method. So if you remember from your HTTP method, you'll see that the post method was used to create, right? So whenever you want to create a resource, you use the post method. So now let's just create a new data, right? So let's say we want to create a new data, and then we want to push it to our server. So for that, what you'll do is you'll use app.post. So app is the same variable that you had created over here. That is basically for our application variable. So app.post, and then what you'll do is you'll mention /API/customers, and then what you'll do is you'll just mention the title. If the title is fine and if it is validated, so basically when I say validate customer, what I mean by that is we have created a function to validate information about the customer. So only if the information is present in the correct format, the customer information will be validated, and yes, the customer information will be pushed into the server. Or if it's not, then automatically there'll be an error thrown. So over here, basically our function validates the customer information, and our condition is basically that, the title should be minimum of 3 characters, right? If it is less than that, then obviously it will see that, it is not a valid information, and then it will throw an error. So that's what is basically happening. So if I go back to my post method over here, you'll see that, if we'll use this function of validate customer, and then if it is validated, what will happen is automatically the customer ID will increase by 1 and title will be stored by the title that you mentioned. So basically that's what is going to happen over here. So remember the fact that since our customer ID is incremented automatically, you don't have to mention the customer ID in your request. You just have to mention the title, and then if the title is greater than 3, that is basically it has a minimum character values of 3, then it will move forward and then automatically the data will be pushed into the server. So when I say push, automatically it has to increase the stack, right? So initially our server had 5 values in its stack. Now we want the 6th one also to enter. So for that, what we'll do is we'll use this function of customer.push customer, right? So basically we'll push the new value of customer object into the customer and then we'll increase the stack. Once it is done, we'll just send a response again back to the client saying that, that particular ID has been created into the stack. So let me just do the same over here. I'll just shift back to my postman, and now let's see, I put post over here, and then I go back to API customers, and then what I do is I go to body over here and then choose raw, and let's say I copy this part, paste it over here, and let's say we mention the name to be Mark, right? So Mark is basically having 4 character values. So that means this customer information should be validated. So over here, I'll mention title Mark, and then in the text option, I'll just go and add JSON, right? So basically this will be identified as a JSON object. And then what I'll do is I'll click on send. So once I click on send, you'll see an output that, automatically ID generated is 6. So that means we had 5 and then automatically it got incremented by 1. Now, if I go back to the get method over here, and then I click on send, you'll see the information of all the 6 values that we have stored in our server. So basically our stack has increased. So that's how, guys, you can use the post method also. Now moving forward with the put method, the put method is basically used to update an existing resource. So if the resource is not found, it's again going to throw an error. But yes, if the resource is found, it can definitely update. So let's see the same how that's happening. So to update a resource, let's say, we consider an example of updating a specific customer ID's name, right? So let's say, we had all the 6 IDs, right? So for example, let's say we update from customer 3's ID and then we mention the name to be Tyler Patterson, right? So for that, what I've coded is basically that whenever app.put, that is basically app is again the same object that you had created over here. That is the Express application. Whenever it is with a put method and has a specific URL, that is API customers, and then you mention the ID, whichever IDs you want to update, whenever the client sends this particular request, what happens is that initially it is first found whether the customer exists or not. For example, let's say, we mentioned the ID to be 7. So we know that, it's not present in a stack, right? So what happens is it will throw an error. So over here, I've put in the 404 error, and then I've mentioned the text to be not found, right? So it basically says the customer is not found. So there's no resource with the ID 7. So obviously you just can't update any resource like that. But yes, if the customer is found, so for example, let's say we're taking the 3rd one. So the customer will be found. Then what will happen is you'll just validate the customer. So in your input, let's say we'll put Tyler Patterson. Then whenever you mention this title, automatically the title will be updated for the 3rd ID. Now, after everything is done, the server has to send a response back also, right? So for that, this particular command is used, that is response sent customer. So basically the customer object is updated with the new values and then the response is sent back to the client. So let's look into the same. So what I'll do is I'll take the 3rd one and then I'll mention the title to be Tyler Patterson. And then I'll choose the method to be put over here and then I'll click on send. Once I click on send, if I scroll down, you'll see the output that, the title is Tyler Patterson for ID 3, right? So now if you just want to look into the stack, what I'll do is I'll go to get, remove this ID over here, click on send over here again. And then you'll see the updated list that, the ID 3 has been updated and the new value is Tyler Patterson. So that's how basically you can use the put method to update your resources. Now, finally, coming to the final resource, guys, that is the delete resource. So the delete method is basically to delete any specific resource. So it's as simple as the name suggests. So to do that, what I've done is I've chosen this app.delete and then I've chosen the URL to be API customers ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mention a specific ID, let's say the 2nd ID. I want the data to be deleted for the 2nd ID. So that's what I'm going to send the request as. And then what will happen is first initially, again, a condition will be checked whether, the customer exists or not. For example, let's say the ID2 doesn't exist. Then automatically again an error will be sent back saying that, not found. But yes, if the customer exists, then what happens is you basically have to remove that particular data, right? So you basically splice from that particular data. All the data that is present in ID2 is removed, and automatically the stack is pushed forward, right? Initially you had 6 values, now you only have 5 values, right? But yes, remember the fact that the ID doesn't get updated automatically. Over here the ID remains the same. Well, I leave it forward to you guys to explore how you can update the ID automatically whenever a resource is removed from the server. So apart from that, finally, after the data is getting deleted, we want the server to send a response back to the client, right? So for that, we again use rest.send customer. That is basically our object. Now I'll shift back to my Postman, and then I'll just choose this option of delete. And let's say, I mentioned the ID to be 2. And then I'll click on send. So once I click on send, you'll see an output that, title Josh and ID2 will be deleted. So when I go back to get method and put customers over here and remove the ID, you'll see we get the data of 13456, but the second one is missing. That's because, the data has got deleted. So that's how basically, guys, you can use various HTTP methods, that is basically the REST API methods, to communicate with client and server and to understand how a request from the client is processed by the server and how the server sends back the response. So guys, with this, we come to an end of this session. I hope all of you found it informative. So if you have any further queries related to the session, please comment in the comment section below. Until then, that's all from our side today. Thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!